And we start this hour with some breaking news that Russia has revoked the accreditation of 6 British diplomats. Russia is accusing them of spying, of espionage. Now, Russia's state security service, the FSB, has said that their activities had threatened national security, but it did not name any of the diplomats. And it said that the move was a measure against multiple unfriendly acts and had what it called documentary proof confirming London's coordination of an escalation in the international political and military situation. Now, it's not clear whether the diplomats are currently in Russia, and one Russian TV channel actually aired footage claiming to show them leaving the country. Well, the Foreign Office here in London has yet to comment, but all of this breaking news follows President Putin's warning that Russia would consider the use of US and British supplied long-range missiles on targets inside Russia as a serious escalation of the war in Ukraine. Now, the UK's Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, is due to discuss giving permission when he meets President Biden in Washington today. It's very high on their agenda. Sir Keir said that Moscow had started the conflict and could end it by withdrawing its troops from Ukraine. So our political editor, Chris Mason, who is travelling with the Prime Minister, sent this report shortly after landing in the United States.
The Prime Minister arriving here in Washington with the Foreign Secretary David Lammy, Sir Keir Starmer's second visit to the White House in 2 months. Ukraine's allies remain rather guarded in their public remarks about a change in policy on the use of Western missiles inside Russia, but the diplomatic dashing to arrive at a decision is in plain sight. And that has proved enough for President Putin to say this.
If this decision is made, it will mean nothing other than direct participation of NATO countries, the United States, European countries, in the war in Ukraine. It is their direct participation, and this, of course, significantly changes the very essence of the conflict. This will mean that NATO countries, the United States, European countries, are fighting with Russia.
So what does the Prime Minister make of that? On our flight here, we had a chance to ask him in what we call a huddle, where all of the reporters on the trip crowd around the Prime Minister and ask questions. It was really striking how defiant Keir Starmer was in his language about Vladimir Putin, repeatedly saying that Russia started this, Moscow caused the conflict, and it could stop it. As for the prospect of those Anglo-French missiles, Storm Shadow missiles, being fired into Russia, he was a little more cautious in his language. He said there are really important developments likely in the next few weeks and months, and therefore a number of tactical decisions ought to be taken. This is the reality of a war grinding on. Russian drone strikes in Konotop in northeastern Ukraine this week. Ukraine's allies want to help counter this and for Kyiv to win. Western missiles may help, but may provoke Russia too. It is a big judgment call. Chris Mason, BBC News in Washington.
A big judgment call indeed. A lot to discuss here. We're going to bring in our first guest on this. I'm pleased to say that we're joined by the former UK ambassador to the United States and to NATO, Sir David Manning. Welcome to the programme. Let's just initially get your reaction in terms of the accusations of Russia, the revocation of the accreditation of 6 British diplomats. Are we witnessing tit for tat here?
Well, I think it's not surprising. This is an effort by Putin to indicate his great displeasure at the fact that we are discussing how best to help Ukraine, and it's completely typical, I think, of his playbook. I imagine there will be some tit for tat, but I don't think we should be surprised that he's resorted to this.
And just drilling down into this, I mean, we obviously the details are very limited at the moment, but what is your understanding of what's happened?
Well, I think he's signalling very clearly, and it's obviously timed to coincide with the Prime Minister's visit to Washington, that he is extremely disconcerted by the possibility that the Ukrainians will be allowed to use Storm Shadow and other missiles to strike at military targets inside Russia in a way they haven't been able to do up to now, and is in a sense sort of trying to get his retaliation in first. But of course, the only reason why he is alarmed is because if Storm Shadow and the other missiles are given this extra targeting capability, it will give Ukraine a better chance of defending itself against this unprovoked aggression.
Is it your understanding, though, that that decision will be made? Because it feels like both Sir Keir Starmer and President Biden are not reining back on this, but they seem to be taking their time, suggesting that this is a very critical decision, which, of course, with your experience, as you know, it will be. But they arguably are not committing to give us a decision during this meeting in Washington.
Well, I'd be surprised if a decision comes out today as a result of the discussion between the Prime Minister and the President. Clearly, a lot of other discussions have been going on. There's an enormous amount of activity in the bilateral relationship at the moment, with David Lammy having been in Kyiv with his American counterpart, Tony Blinken, earlier in the week. And clearly, these discussions are going on. We don't actually know what this decision will be. We're assuming that the decision will be to loosen the targeting discipline, but let's see. But I think we will find that there is continuing discussion, and I don't imagine that the final decision will emerge today.
So, regardless of, just in terms of, depending on what the decision is, obviously, and as you suggest, we're unlikely to get it today, but just with your experience as the former UK ambassador to NATO, if it is a yes, if it is permission to allow Ukraine to use those missiles in Russian territory, does that mean that Russia has the permission to then attack back outside of Ukraine to other countries? Does that mean that you are potentially escalating this situation, this war, in terms of the Article 5 that NATO is aligned to, that is the basis of the...
It's clearly a big decision to take. I don't want to suggest otherwise. But the only reason we're in this situation is because that Russia has attacked Ukraine in an unprovoked way, and Ukraine has the right under international law to defend itself. And we are supplying weapons to Ukraine to do that. But at the moment, what Putin is experiencing is a Ukraine which in effect has one of its hands tied behind its back. We have supplied Ukraine with the weapons to defend itself, but said that there are very strict limits to what you can do. We're in a situation where the Russians can rain down whatever they like on Ukraine, schools, hospitals, whatever it may be, but we have a situation in which Ukrainians are very limited in what they're allowed to do, not least to the bases where these raids are coming from. So this can be stopped instantly. As the Prime Minister has said, and as others have said, there is no need for this to happen. Putin can stop this war. This is a war of aggression. And if he's worried about being hit by the Ukrainian inside Russia, he has a very simple way of stopping that, which is to stop the war.
OK, for the time being, Sir David Manning, really appreciate your expertise and your insight, former UK ambassador to the US and to NATO. Thank you. We're going to cross over live straight away to Warsaw. Our Eastern Europe correspondent is there. Sarah Rainsford joins us live. Sarah, obviously, we've got this developing situation, a lot to discuss with, bearing in mind that Sir Keir Starmer is in Washington. But just bring us up to date with what we know so far regarding this accusation from Russia about those UK diplomats.
Yeah, I think the timing of this is key. This is not accidental that this has been released, that this is happening precisely as those discussions are taking place in Washington about whether or not Ukraine can use Western long-range missiles to strike inside Russia. They're absolutely connected. And it's interesting looking at the statement from the FSB, Russia's security agency, when they're talking about expelling essentially 6 members of the British embassy, accusing them of espionage or intelligence and subversive activities. It's interesting, they also go on to talk about Britain being responsible for escalating what they describe as the military political situation right now, say that Britain is coordinating all of this and claiming that there's a department of the Foreign Office which is specifically dedicated to the strategic defeat of Russia. So I think all of this really needs to be seen in the context of two things. One is about threats. It's about Russia saying, look what we can do if you go ahead with this. But I think it's also about the narrative within Russia. This is about Vladimir Putin and his system essentially painting the West as enemies and making sure that Russians see what's happening as Russia as the victim in all of this, with Western agents supposedly plotting subversion and trying to undermine and to weaken Russia, and Russia therefore acting in self-defense. Of course, that's absolutely the reverse position that is presented by Western politicians, Western diplomats, who quite clearly say this is about Ukraine's right to self-defense. This is about protecting Ukraine from a war of aggression, which was launched quite clearly by Vladimir Putin and which he has the power to stop. That was the robust line from Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, just yesterday on his way to Washington.
OK, Sarah, listen, really good to get your expertise there and your insight, quick reaction to that developing story. Sarah Rainsford there joining us live from Warsaw.